It's not something that I'm in a rush to buy, but it's a very interesting kind of stock. So mine is Ubiquiti. Its ticker is UI. It trades on the NASDAQ, I believe. And the thing that's really sort of drawn me to this one is that its float, the actual shares that are available for us retail investors to purchase, is absolutely tiny. And that's not because it's got massive amounts of institutional owners that have been hanging on for a long time. It's because the CEO owns the best part of, over 90% of the shares. So the CEO is called Robert Perra. He's a former engineer at Apple. He left in 2005 to form Ubiquiti. So he never took on any debt. He never took on any VC. So his ownership has always remained really, really high. So I was reading through the history, and they've actually only ever managed to lose money once, and it wasn't even in 2005. It was in 2010. So just a random year to lose money on. So anyway, what does it do? Ubiquiti makes high-end networking equipment. So this is for service providers and for enterprises. You've probably seen it if you've been on Amazon looking for routers and things like that, because they do have a small consumer arm. So they manufacture in low-cost countries. They use Vietnam, China, Taiwan to do all their assembly. The products are primarily used in places that need really, really widespread, high-quality coverage. So think of it like your university campus or your hotels or even our local provider. It's basically networked to our whole city. So we can use our... It's really strange. We can use our home Wi-Fi while walking around in the town, but it's still not a good enough reason to ever go to the town. Services side is cell tower networking technology, standard stuff that you're putting on the big pylons. So this part of the business is it's not a particularly interesting business. It's growing at sort of mid to low single digits most years. The enterprise side, though, that's going quite a bit faster. But the problem is over the last couple of years, it's been hit by the pandemic in two ways. So one, lowered demand because anywhere that we were seeking to congregate was shut because of the pandemic. And two, you guessed it, this one has been a victim of the chip shortage. So looking through the revenue, it's pretty diversified globally. It's got about 40% of sales in North America, 40% in the EU, 10% in Asia Pacific, and 10% in South America. So pretty well split. So the hook, Ubiquiti really, really like buybacks, and they buy back quite a bit when the stock is cheap. Year to date, they're down 16% at the moment, and they're buying back their stock at a pretty crazy speed. Now, normally, the sort of buybacks that they're doing wouldn't move the needle, but the vast majority of the stock is locked up by the owner, and he isn't selling. So look, they've got 500 million in debt now, which is about a year's free cash flow. And just looking at the flow, there's only about 7% left for them to buy back. And they've just announced a new $300 million buyback plan. So with a market cap of about 15 billion, that's another 2% coming off the float. So my question really is, when does Robert Perra choose to take this private? And potentially he could do this at a decent premium because he's not been taking a salary from the business. He's not been giving himself any extra stock as part of his compensation package. He's just been taking the dividend, which for Paul is 1%. I think it's a really interesting stock. You don't see a lot of stocks like this anymore, Steve. Is there something here that you would like?
It's a really interesting exercise, isn't it? That buyback story is fascinating. So it's buying back about 2% of its float on about sort of with about 7% outstanding, you're saying. So that kind of leaves you about 5%. You would expect that to kind of creep up a little bit, I guess, because buybacks sort of push a price in the market cap. They push the price of the individual shares higher, even if the market cap stays the same. I guess at some point it might get kind of prohibitively expensive. I was trying to work out when that is. So if you're really determined, you take this company private as is. And I was looking at its balance sheet, and it looks like it's in decent shape. It's on a price-earnings ratio about similar to Halma that I was looking at, which is sort of 30, maybe a touch higher than 30. And I thought that made Halma expensive, and I thought Halma's growth was okay. Is it cheap here for buying things back?
It's only cheap in the sort of like the grand scheme of things when you look at it, because there's so little float. available for a stock to lose 16%. That means that its retail base has unanimously been selling the business essentially there. So I think Perra is willing to buy this at any old price, but it's definitely down from its highs. I mean, its highs, it touched nearly 400. It's now down at 248. So I would say that he finds this pretty cheap. Just to say, this has been an absolutely incredible market beater over its time. If you picked it at IPO, it's done over 13,000%. So it's been a 13 bagger, and really with minimal drawdown. Really, if you're looking down that chart, you see the odd little spike coming down, but it's just been a nice steady up curve to, probably in the next 2 or 3 years when Robert Perra decides he's had enough of us and takes it private or buys the remaining float. He's an incredibly rich man looking at the 90% of 15 billion market cap. He's done rather well. He's
getting a nice dividend off that too. I mean, that's basically what Paul dreams of being, I suppose, owning one business and collecting a massive dividend from it, and basically that being your kind of income sorted for pretty much ever. I'm looking at this chart, by the way, and it reminds me a lot of the Halma chart from what I can see of it. It did very, very well in a bull market, and that's not to say it just did well because it was in a bull market. I'm pretty sure it would have outpaced that bull market fairly comfortably, and it's come back a bit since sort of last February when people started talking about rising interest rates and maybe thinking some of the steam was coming out of this enthusiastic SPAC movement and so on and so forth. So I guess now is the time for buying back stock if you were going to buy back stock. I mean, is this buyback stuff pretty sort of consistent? Does he kind of dollar cost average into his own stock, I guess, or does he look for his moments?
It's really difficult to say because you never exactly know exactly what they've bought, but generally it tends to be whatever they make, they service their debt, they run the company, and whatever's left gets buying back stock and pays out a dividend. So, just an interesting stock. I don't think I've seen anything like it, not for a long time. Anyway.
So you think there's no place in your portfolio for this? I think there's not a place for this in mine either, and I'll tell you why in a moment. But you don't think there's one for you?
It depends, really, because it's difficult to know the motivation, isn't it? I think with a stock, you really want to have a clear understanding of the motivations, especially when the founder owns so much of this company. He's still young; he's only in his 40s, so you would assume. Does he want to retire? If he wants to retire, he could get rid of this company to private equity overnight, and I guess he wouldn't mind if he sells it for 15 billion and 1 pence, owning 90% of it. The reason that attracts me to the company is that the high ownership. But the reason I probably wouldn't buy it is also the high ownership, because unless you can have a sit down and chat with this guy and say, I think. Because the vast majority of the business is him. It's his idea, it's his baby, he's the founder, he's the one who's took it from nothing to something, he's the one that's growing it at this rapid pace, and you just think, I just need to know what your motivations are, and if you could have a chat with him, I think, you'd probably go out and buy it. But in the meantime, you've just got to sort of scratch your head and say, what a fascinating story, stick it on the watch list and just be interested to see what happens with it.
I'm not even sure it's making it to my watch list for what it's worth, but I get your thought here. It's definitely a story that I'm interested in following in a certain way. The reason I'm not buying it, I think, is the same, although I'd probably word it slightly different. The reason I would own this stock, if I owned this stock, would be, in like the purest sense, speculation of, I think I can sell this to some other dude at a higher price, specifically the dude who owns all the rest of it, because I think he will buy it back off me at whatever the hell the price is. I'd be kind of hoping the price goes up, because then I'd be pretty sure someone will take it out off my hands at a buyback thing. And it may well do that, because the buyback will push the stock as it goes. If you buy back 2% of the float, 2% of the shares, and there's only 7% of the shares outstanding, that has to move the stock price up. It's going to destroy the book value, but I looked at this company, and it has a really weird book value anyway. That's not a good way to value this, because when I was trying to figure out whether or not this is a good price to be buying back stock, I tried to look for a price to book and I couldn't find one, because it actually strictly looks like it's probably negative equity at the moment. That's not the be-all and end-all of a company like this by any means. Book value is a wildly misleading thing in some cases. I'm prepared to believe it is in this case. I can fully well think that's true. But yeah, in my case, I would only be owning this because I thought I could flock it to someone else. And whilst I didn't get involved in this story as a participant, although I again watched it excitedly from the sidelines, I saw the Twitter thing with Elon Musk, and I didn't pile into those shares on the idea that I would sell them to him more expensive. And that's I'm feeling quite pleased with myself for not having done that. So I'm generally minded to stay out of things where that's pretty much my only reason for owning the stock. Of I think this price will go up, and I think this dude will buy it off me, and it does.
I think the other reason I'm quite interested in watching the story as well is that what happens when he gets to the kind of levels where the people in the float don't want to sell to him anymore. Maybe there's 5 or 4 or 3% of people who want to hold on to Ubiquiti. Does he start rapidly increasing that dividend to get rid of the free cash? Could you end up with, a company that generates 600 million of free cash and basically wants to distribute it all the way through, him and the float? That dividend percentage could increase pretty rapidly.
Yeah, I was going to ask you about that, but I thought it was a dumb question, and I thought the reason it might be was because I suppose he could just choose to take it private at some point. I mean, the people who don't want to sell their Twitter shares to Elon Musk or their Activision shares to Microsoft, if they're the likes of you and me, and I don't own either of those companies, and don't think I ever have owned either one. Thought about Activision Blizzard once a long time ago. I kind of think, isn't it just sort of too bad if they decide they don't want to sell their shares? They kind of have to.
Well, he is, but he can take the company private right now if he wants to, because he owns that much of it. He's almost entitled to do so, isn't he? And he hasn't chosen to do it.
No, he appears to want to not pay a kind of market premium and just sort of take it out bit by bit at whatever the market rate is, maybe when he thinks the market rate is attractive, rather than saying, here's a 20-30% premium, I'm having them, basically. But maybe it gets to the stage where he has to do that in the end.
The opposite of that is also true, I guess, though, is that he might be thinking, I don't need to work anymore. I'm 46. I could sell this and pocket 12 billion and a bit
Stick
more.
Stick it all into AT&T and get a massive dividend.
Can do whatever he wants. Yeah, if that's AT&T is what he wants to do, then be my guest. But I mean, it's just another one of those fantastic American entrepreneur stories, isn't it? A hidden company that's 15 billion. That you've got an incredibly rich guy there. Really, I'm surprised I've not stumbled across his name before.
How did you stumble across his name?
I stumbled across it in a Twitter thread because when the share price dropped, it dropped about 4 or 5% in a day. They announced their new buyback plan immediately off the back of it, which made me just think, "Whoa, this is what you want to see, isn't it? When the share price is going down, companies buying back stock, regardless of whether you think that's necessarily the right thing, whether it's at the right cheapness. It's definitely better buying back the stock at this price, 250, than it is at 400. So that was how I spotted it, and I just, you catch a thread and you run after it and you chase it down. You think this is just an absolutely bonkers story.
I forget how much of your research comes from Twitter, by the way, and I mean that in the best way, for what it's worth. I kind of find your stuff always interesting every week and sort of wonder where a lot of it comes from. Some of it I know because we listen to some of the same podcasts, like the Diploma stuff, like Anything On, Motley Fool, and so on. But yeah, I keep forgetting how much you look at stuff like Twitter and how much your Twitter doesn't look like mine, probably.
It's my old ear to the ground kind of thing. I like to read and consume as much as I absolutely can, and not because I actually. Sorry to say this to anybody who is a listener, but. I'm not particularly bothered what you think about the stock, but I am interested about the stocks themselves. Do you know what I mean? So I'll formulate my own opinion on it. And, I quite like listening to stock reviews and reading stock threads, but that doesn't necessarily mean that you're going to sway me. But I do like it when I see a ticker and I don't know it, or don't have a rough idea of what it does. So I think we've done 2 of them today because I didn't have a clue what Halma was before. So and Ubiquiti. Well, yeah, it was just interesting to learn about.
I hadn't heard about. I was quite enjoying looking at the other stock you sent me, actually, which we will come to another time.